You know, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a map of Florida exactly the same again. It was the first week of school. I love the first week of school. I had 25 freshly scrubbed faces looking up at me, those fourth graders. And back behind them, I had my demure little student teacher, Brittany, back there. And next to her, I had Miss Chauncey, worldly wise Miss Chauncey. She was the language teacher who was inclusion in my class that year. That meant she was there to kind of especially look out for the kids that had hearing impairments. So I had 4 of them that year. And she was especially looking out for those, but she was helping with, she wasn't calling attention to them. She was kind of helping with everybody, but keeping a special eye on those 4. And it was great to have another grown-up in the room. There were some years, when I didn't see another grown-up very often. And it was good always to have another grown-up in the room with me. I felt like I was a better teacher when there was another grown up in the room with me. And these 2 were wonderful. I enjoyed having them there. They were back in the back of the room too. All, 25, 26, 27 of them looking at me and enjoying a wonderful story. You see, every year that I've had a homeroom since 1970, up until 2013 when I retired, I've read my favorite children's chapter book to those kids. 16 chapters of a wonderful adventure story called The Lion's Paw by Rob White. And they were all looking at me as I was introducing them to Penny and Nick and Ben and that wonderful sloop, the Heart of Lee, so far. And getting ready for that story. And it's set in Florida. And right off, wouldn't you know it, the word peninsula showed up. Well, now, I'm a social studies teacher, and landforms are a part of 4th grade social studies. So I captured that teachable moment to ask the kids. I said, now, how many of you know what a peninsula is? I want you to know not a single one of those 25 kids raised their hand. I don't know whether it was the beginning of the year nerves, they're afraid to say anything, or whether really none of them knew it. But I said, well, let me tell you about a peninsula. I said, it's not like an island. An island is completely surrounded by water. But a peninsula is a piece of land that juts out into a body of water so that it's got water on 3 sides. And that's like Florida, isn't it? Let me show you. And I took a red whiteboard marker, and with an exuberant flourish, I drew a nice big outline of Florida dangling down into the Caribbean on the whiteboard. This is the shape of Florida, isn't it? It's a peninsula. Let me show you how to spell it. And I wrote it on the board. P-E, and as I wrote it, I was continuing to talk to the kids about peninsula. Having a good time teaching them about it. I don't know exactly what happened in my brain, but somehow I managed to skip over that second N, and I went straight on to the S that follows. S. It just didn't quite look right. There's the outline, and then we've got P-E-N-I-S on the board. It didn't look quite right to me. And I'm thinking about that, and I'm talking to the kids, and I'm not continuing spelling the word because, something's not quite right. And then slowly, intruding onto my consciousness, came a gurgling, coughing, spitting, giggling noise from back in the back. And I glanced back there, and there was my demure little student teacher, Brittany, with her hands over her mouth, her shoulders shaking, and happiness and mirth just bubbling out of her whole face. And next to her was the worldly wise Miss Chauncey with her arms splayed out and a look of merriment, almost naughty merriment, on her face as she was taking in the sight. And I turned back to the board. It wasn't quite right. And as I did, I heard Miss Chauncey say, "Mr. Shaw, You might want to just erase what you've written there and start over again. The scales fell from my eyes. I realized what I had inadvertently labeled so inappropriately, but appropriately. And I quickly grabbed an eraser, and with reciprocating motion, I obliterated that word and rewrote it, careful to put in that second N. P-E-N-I-N-S-U-L-A, peninsula. Glancing back to the back of the room, I see that Brittany has now arisen from her seat, turned her back to me, and her shoulders are still shaking. And Chauncey is still leaned back, but one hand is on her face, as I can tell she is constructing a story that will be told to every member of the faculty before the day was out. I was right about that. By the time lunch came, I walked into the cafeteria and over to the door to the little side room where the teachers like to eat. As I opened the door, every teacher in that little lunchroom turned their faces toward me, and they were grinning from ear to ear. And I want you to know I heard from them. They had a really good time at my expense. Well, the rest of the afternoon went pretty much as normal. Brittany had the last lesson of the day, and she was just wrapping up when we heard the intercom come on. And the principal began to drone his afternoon announcements. Do you suppose they have a class in principal school on how to speak in an absolute monotone? I suspect they do. And he did that. It went on and on and on. But as he's wrapping up, and it's almost time for that bell to ring, suddenly his voice is enlivened. It is animated. It becomes almost exuberant as he proclaims a special shout out to Mr. Shaw for his cross-curricular efforts in combining literature and social studies and anatomy. Well, I heard a lot from that over the next few years. And when I showed up for my retirement party, turned out it was a retirement roast. And that faculty had the best time with me. I learned all about how my reputation was that I spilled coffee a lot. That came up often. But finally, several of the teachers actually constructed a skit of the time Mr. Shaw taught the kids about peninsula. And, I got lucky. I don't think there was a single kid that caught on to the joke. But those teachers sure did. And they sure had a good time with it. And even on the day of my retirement, I was reminded that I'll never really look at the map of Florida in quite the same way again.